Okay, very good evening to all of you. Uh, First of all, I would like to very warmly welcome you to this session on internal audit during pandemic times, which is organized by the Institute of Internal Auditors Sri Lanka chapter, along with the Academy of Finance. My name is Kapila Doramgoda. I am the founder, managing director of Academy of Finance. And Academy of Finance is an institution which has been formed about 12 years ago with the objective of educational opportunities to already qualified finance professionals as well as non-finance professionals to improve their knowledge in finance related areas. In this endeavor, the institute has partnered with a number of professional bodies, uh, and one of the main bodies amongst them is the Institute of Internal Auditors. And Academy of Finance has been offering the Certified Internal Auditor program of Institute of Internal Auditors for the last many years. So that's all about us. And without taking much of your time, let me now invite and introduce Mr. Ashen Jayasekara, who is going to moderate this session for you. Ashen is the Deputy Managing Partner of BDO Sri Lanka, and he's also a member of the Governing Council of CA Sri Lanka. And he heads the cyber security and fraud and forensic services practice in the firm with over 17 years of experience in overseeing corporate governance reviews, risk assessment, and compliance related work. And he's a fellow of the fellow chartered accountant. He holds a master's in business administration and bachelor's in science in information systems. He's a CIA USA and CFP and CISA USC. And Ashen is actually the facilitator of the Certified Internal Auditor program conducted at the Academy of Finance. Over to you, Ashen, to take over the session from this point onwards. Thank you.
Thank you, Kapila. A very warm welcome to all of you once again. And I would like to welcome you to this session on internal auditing during pandemic times. Our first speaker this evening is Sion Nyogi. Sion currently serves as the Corporate Services Director at the International Water Management Institute. He has been working in the non-profit sector for almost 22 years. He has worked in almost 20 plus countries, managing large-scale humanitarian and development projects. He is, of course, a member of the Institute of Internal Auditors since 2003 and is a certified internal auditor since 2009. He also holds numerous certifications. He holds a certification in risk management assurance and a certification in control self-assessment offered by the Institute of Internal Auditors USA. He is also an associate of the Chartered Institute of Management Accountants UK and holds an MBA from the University of Wales. He's also a certified information systems auditor and a certified fraud examiner. May I now invite Sion to make his presentation. If you do have any questions, you can post it in the chat box, and I will post all these questions to the speakers at the end in the Q&A session. So over to you, Sion.
Thank you, Ashan. Thank you. So to start the presentation, when I share my slide, would you be taking off the current slides, Ashan, or? Yeah, okay.
You can share your deck, yes.
Sure, okay. I'm having an issue in sharing. It's somehow is not taking, Ashan.
Right. Is it the slide deck you sent me this morning?
No. Should I quickly?
If you email it to me, I can share it from my end.
Okay.
So give us a few minutes until we sort out the technical issues.
Ashan J, right?
Yeah, JAY.
I've sent.
Okay, just give me a second.
Okay, I've been able to share.
Okay, fine.
Has it come?
Yes, yes,
It's showing up, right?
yes, yes.
Yes, we can see.
That's fine.
Thank you. Sorry for this mix-up. So thank you again, and welcome to everybody who are attending this session. I'll be going through a few slides in which I will try to go through some of the developments that is happening in the world of internal audit globally with regards to the pandemic. The basis of this presentation is largely the literature and research that the Institute of Internal Auditors have been doing, which have come out in the Institute's different publications, and some of the guidance notes that have come out with the pandemic. So for my session, what I have done is I have divided into different sections. So first is the COVID-19. What is different with this global pandemic? Then were we ready for this pandemic as a whole? Then what has happened with internal audit in the last 10 months? Because it's largely the last 10 months when the pandemic has hit us, starting probably around December, January in China, and then spreading throughout the world. What is different for the internal auditors now? The lessons that the audit committees are seeing in terms of lessons and challenges, and then the future of internal audit in this new world. So that's how my presentation is divided. And it's largely based on the publications that the Institute has produced, which you can also refer to when you go to the website. So what is different? If you look at this presentation, this slide, it sort of gives you an analysis, a situation of what is happening, what has happened in the last 10 years. One is, it has seen huge amount of unemployment globally in all sectors. Some countries more, some countries less. But there's hardly any country which has not been affected by this pandemic. It's actually the highest and higher than even the Great Depression, which was one of the events when unemployment was at its highest. Almost every country faced a GDP growth decrease in the negatives, most of the countries. And there's huge insolvency that's happening. But at the same time, we are seeing the stock markets racing above, reaching global heights. So it's a pretty awkward situation. And if you're following the news, there has been an interview from Bill Gates a few days back, where he was talking about this pandemic. And as you all know, there was already a lot of information out there that a global pandemic like this could come. And what he said was that he's surprised that the pandemic didn't affect the health of people that much, but he was surprised by the economy, the way it has affected the economy. So while it has been, it's still going on, and good news and bad news are coming and going, it seems that the economy, the effect on the economy and the way we live has been long term. Now, some of the effects, if you review the material, some interesting aspects. Probably for the first time where every company is trying to reduce for people to come to office, like maximize people working from online. I was speaking with one of my, in one of the boards that I've been a member, and we were looking at renewing our lease. And it seems that, every office block in some parts of states are getting empty because everybody is just going back home and working from there. So it's a global change, which will have real long-term effects. Now, the next question is, were we ready for the global pandemic? And it seems to have surprised everybody. But as we just said, there were enough studies there that that this is going to come. So it was not really a black swan event. But when we look at the risk plans, like if you go back and look at the risk plans of most of the organizations, while there were some pandemic plans, largely because people did see the avian flu, SARS, and companies which have worked in Africa had seen the Ebola crisis. But most of these plans never looked at it as a global pandemic. It all looked at as either as a regional epidemic or a country level epidemic. So the plans were largely falling much shorter than what it was, what it required. And also the measures that have been put in, if you look at those plans, they are largely academic and were never tested. But saying that, if you really look at the way companies have coped, like even us, we are sitting here and doing this webinar. It seems, that if this had happened like not even 20 years back, like 5 years back, it would have been a very different disaster than what it is now. It seems all the technology that has been that we were building up over the years is paying the dividend for this crisis, though the plans were not necessarily at the level where it could address all the issues. Now, in terms of internal audit in the last 10 months, what has happened in the last 10 months? So I remember attending a webinar done by IIA Sri Lanka. And at that time, the discussions were largely of surprise, largely of a situation where internal audit was not the focus, and companies were trying to survive. But if you and if you look at the materials that that has come out after that, is that chief audit executives must be setting up risk-based plans, review and adjust the plan. So basically, what we talked about in the last few slides, that while there were some risk plans put into the documents, but they were epidemic plans. So after the pandemic hit, most of the organizations had to relook at everything they did and start developing new plans. So that's what the literature talks about, that the chief audit executives now need to really look at the organizations from a COVID lens and create new plans and be continuously proactive. The days of creating a plan for an annual basis is gone, probably. It almost requires a daily review or a monthly review of these documents. The other interesting feature that has come out is there is almost every literature that we are looking at and every discussion, like every research that is coming out, it all talks about remote working and how the auditors should get ready to manage audits remotely using different tools, which requires very different skills or reskilling. The literature, like a lot of research now also talks about providing appropriate mitigation strategies and identifying emerging risks. So the internal audit team is basically a team that will help with the training, the risk training that we have to identify emerging risks, and also start playing a role of advisory services. Like always, IIA, like the internal auditors do play an advisory role, but now it seems that the advisory services are much more important in this change scenario. And also looking at proactively supporting the management in developing the post-pandemic plans. You know, we really don't know. While there is some review, like good news coming out that we will soon be having vaccination, but then we get to know that a new variation of COVID has come out. So it's a very different world that we are looking at, and there is questions about how the new world will look like. But internal audit is a very has a very important role to support the management in designing this post-pandemic plans. The next is the audit, like which we just talked about in the last literature. You know, audit teams should also remain very flexible to utilize available resource, because you know there is not going to be huge amount of resource that is going to be available. You know, every company, every organization is looking at you know, fundamentally less resource you know, situation. The sales are down. You know, the global aid is down. So every company is almost looking at lesser revenue, other than some of the IT companies which are really seeing huge amount, a big change in revenue. So there is going to be lesser amount of resources. So audit teams have to be very flexible to use them to do the work. Then the concept of training and testing is becoming very important, largely because of the reskilling requirements, because the new world is very different. It requires very different skills. You know, like, you know, I was having challenge in finding the, you know, to share my screen, you know, and even after doing so many webinars. So it's a very different world. You know, you are no longer standing up in front of a crowd, in front of people and presenting, getting the interactions. You know, so everything has changed. You know, from for auditors, you know, you don't get you know, the touch and feel of going into a client's office and seeing the documents. You have to depend on remote working. You know, using tools, electronic tools. So it's a very different world, which requires retraining ourselves and even retraining the way we think. Probably the thinking is the place where the difference is. Also, there is a need for the organization and the leadership in the internal audit teams to work with the teams. And also, as we do the audit, we need to look at the staff care aspect, which was not necessarily the most important focus that we had. So now that as we look at every audit, you know, we need to look at each of the functions, how they're getting ready in terms of their COVID preparedness, their staff care aspects, their customer care aspects, which is a different way of thinking for us as auditors. And the other point is we also have to be ready for like playing as a team, because you know, the sickness, you know, like that can affect the team. So how do we play as a team and support each other? It's not like, you know, individuals working in a team. Now it's a team full of individuals who work together, which is now the new requirement. The next is, what is the difference for the internal auditors now? With this, with the last few slides that I presented, what you have largely seen is that the world has changed. The companies are having revenue challenges. We require very different skills of working, more remote working and a different approach. The way we do the audits have changed. The advisory roles are becoming more important. So what is different for us now? It's largely what we talked about in the literature that I showed before, that retraining for this new audit world is extremely important. And the IIA skills, that we built in, and then added to that, the technical skills that we are developing is becoming very important. While we're saying that, it's important to understand that the audit itself is not really changing. The internal audit focus that we had, the standards that we had to follow, they are not necessarily changing. So technical competence in the work we do is very important, and also understanding the cybersecurity is essential. But again, the point is, internal audit by itself is not changing, but how we do it is changing, and that's the biggest retraining that we need to do is the thinking of how we do audits, not necessarily the way we do internal audit itself. The next is the research materials that the classification I have here is the lessons and challenges for the audit committee. This is a very different world that the audit committee faces. The audit committees normally, they have always been used to doing face-to-face meetings, understanding how the organizations work. Now it's a different world, where the organizations are working largely through remote processes, which has changed some of the risks. So one of the literature here that I've put up is that the audit committees have to be alert about the expanding of issues. They have always done their work in a certain way. They now need to rethink whether the processes they have been following is enough, or there are different ways of looking at how the management is working, how to interact with the management to understand the risks so that they can make the right governance decisions. And one of the big issues, which I'm sure many of you have been seeing, the COVID-19 has come up with some unique fraud issues. The level of fraud has really increased. There is much more issues with cyber controls, which has exposed many organizations to some major frauds. So the audit committees have to rethink how they work and focus on this key aspect much more than what they had been doing before. Then the audit committees also have the responsibility to encourage the senior management and governing bodies for continuous improvement. This is something that that I think audit committees always did, but probably innovation is becoming more important in this current situation than ever, and that's where audit committees have to constantly support and encourage the senior management, because it's just not the business as usual. It's a very different new normal where the audit committees have to assist and give support to the senior management to make these major decisions. communication is extremely important, as we all know. For any change management, organizational communication is very important. But now what we are going through is that normal management is becoming change management. So it's important that there are proper communication processes, there are tools developed, and there are redundancies built into the communication system. So it's communication as the audit committees need to ensure that management puts enough emphasis on communication. Probably that becomes part of the review that the audit committee does in their meetings. And quite interestingly, what we have always been taught in communication is that communication has to be always, like every side, and bottom-up communication is also very important. But this is probably a scenario where top-down communication is becoming very important along with other ways of communicating. And it's largely because with this remote situation, there is little face-to-face talk, and probably a top-down communication channel, along with the other modes of communication, builds a certain trust among the employees that that there is the actual information is coming through this channel only, and the difference between rumors and actual communication is becoming very important. So probably it's a very different. Like when I looked at this article, I found it quite interesting that top-down communication is being recommended as one of the major ways to address this change management process. Now, the future of internal audit in this new world, it's largely based on, like we already talked about the changes that has happened. We talked about that the world is becoming more virtual. Everybody is working from home. There is a focus of working from home. Like in many of the companies, they have already decided that people will be working remotely till the end of 2021 and probably forever. The staff care situation has changed, and the roles of internal audit has changed as well. So what is the future of internal audit in this new virtual world? Probably one of the key points to understand is that the future of internal audit depends on the organizational success. So it has to focus on that. That's one of the key aspects that is necessary. And then the internal auditors also have to be very proactive in trying to find ways to contribute, learn, and grow. The old way of just doing audit, preparing a plan and doing the audit, doing the recommendations, will probably not be the way in the future. We already discussed about the role as an advisory service, and that's key. Like as the pandemic goes on and we near to and when we near the situation where we get into the post-pandemic situation, IIAs, the internal auditors will have to find new ways of contributing, and it will all come from learning and growing along with the organization. What it also demands is there is some interesting articles that has come out that this pandemic is a bigger challenge for supervisors than for supervisees, and it has been more difficult for the managers. So what is required now is to move away from being a manager to being a leader, and that is where the future of internal auditors will lie. How much leadership can be shown? Are we just going to be managers and manage the situation, or are we going to be leaders to assist our organization and the rest of the organization to grow? And then the next important point is exercise your relevance. Internal audit is a relevant department. There were talks at one time, like how relevant is internal audit in this situation? The revenues are going down. The auditors cannot really go and audit. The management is stressed out. The departments are having a challenge in doing the normal work. But we need to understand that we are very relevant, and that's what we have to constantly keep in our mind, because with the added risk, with the changing world, with every day being a new day, a new type of risk, internal audit is probably the only way the board, the management can keep the organization sane and in the right track. And that's where our role is, assisting the management, finding out the key risks. That's what we have been trained for. So they are extremely relevant. And the last point I would like to make before I end my session is, as noted in this literature which you are seeing on the screen, internal audit is indispensable, and we have to demonstrate that. It's not another department which is good to have, but it is a very important department. And the internal auditors, through their commitment to the work, through the way of contributing to the organization's success, by learning, by contributing and growing, we can demonstrate that we are indispensable. And that's very important for the organization and even for the world outside the organizations, the whole governance environment in a country and in the companies. So with that, I have finished my presentation. Back to you, Ashan.
Thank you, Zion, for your wonderful presentation, your overview on the challenging role faced by internal auditors today, especially in this COVID-19 situation. I would now like to very, very briefly introduce Prasanna to you all. Prasanna is the Chief Risk and Control Officer of Hemas Holdings PLC, a large listed conglomerate in Sri Lanka. Prior to becoming the CRO, he was the General Manager and headed the internal audit and risk function at Hemas. He also worked in senior management roles at Dialog Axiata and at the Brandix Group. He is a member of the ACCA and has a degree from the Oxford Brookes University. He is currently reading for his doctorate in business administration. May I now invite Prasanna to address you all. Prasanna, over to you.
Thank you, Ashen. Good evening, everyone. How you guys are doing? Let me share my screen, and my presentation will be a very brief presentation. Then we can move to the Q&A session. So thank you very much, Zion, for that interesting insights what you have shared. So I'm not going to give you a theoretical perspective, but practically what has been happening in Colombo-based companies' internal audit departments, what most of these companies were doing. So for my presentation, I spoke to many of my friends who work in the various companies, such as various organizations, and I got some insights from them, and just I made a small presentation based on that, and my discussion will also be based on that. So pandemic. So pandemic seems to be not going to end very soon, because Britain, they have identified a new strain of the virus, and up to in Colombo, we have been having flights from London for the last few weeks. I mean, and from tomorrow onwards, only the flights are going to get cancelled. So hopefully nothing goes wrong here. So anyhow, we had to get prepared for this pandemic for a quite a long period than whatever we would have been assumed earlier. So what we have been doing from March 2020 onwards, because until March 2020, pandemic was a news for us because China was getting locked down, Wuhan was getting locked down, in Italy people are dying. So we were hearing as a news, but from March onwards, it became a reality. So from March onwards, what the internal audit departments in Colombo has been doing. Let me look at the definition of internal audit before moving into what exactly we were doing and how our roles were changed. Internal auditing is an independent, objective assurance and consulting activity designed to add value and improve an organization's operations. It helps an organization accomplish its objectives by bringing a systematic, disciplined approach to evaluate and improve the effectiveness of risk management, control, and governance processes. I'm going to take only two words from the whole definition. Internal audit is an objective assurance as well as a consulting activity. As internal auditors, one of our job is to give assurance to the board saying that particular operation is functioning properly or particular internal controls are functioning properly or financial internal controls are functioning properly. We are supposed to provide an assurance to the board saying that things are happening okay by providing our audit reports, as well as it's a consulting activity as well, where we as internal auditors go to different departments and we learn different practices which other people who are working in other departments normally don't do. So when we get this knowledge, it's good for us to consult. It's good for us to improve help to improve the organizations as well, the departments as well. So it's a consulting activity plus an objective assurance. But if I look at post pandemic, mostly, right, I'm not sure about you guys, but mostly if I talk from my perspective, like mostly we were doing objective assurance engagement. We are the internal auditors. We were doing strategic audits, operational audits, compliance audits, as well as what do you call the financial control audits. All we were doing, and we were providing various assurance, as well as when we were doing the audits, we were giving suggestions to improve the internal controls as well. So a little bit of consulting, but more it's an objective assurance activity. But what happened once the pandemic started hitting? What I saw was like the requirement or the businesses wanted the internal auditors to give more advice, give more consulting, help them to manage the crisis. That what basically the businesses wanted. So the role what internal auditor played has started to change. For example, a few of the things what changed the way we what actually changed. First one, once in March, April, the internal audit teams were asked to contribute to develop COVID compliance frameworks. So there were various SBUs, various businesses operating. So the internal audit teams got involved in developing COVID compliance framework. We were supposed to engage with the medical practitioners. We were supposed to engage with the HR teams. We were supposed to engage with the health and safety officers. And we were part of the team which were developing the COVID compliance framework for the whole organization. And not only the company which I work, but most of the companies, most of the internal auditors were involved in developing this COVID compliance framework. Then there was a problem, like suddenly you have a framework and you want to roll out the framework to all over the organization, right? It's a difficult thing because you need someone who has a reach to each and every department in the organization. If I look at a conglomerate like Hema's or John Keel's or a big organization, it may be difficult to find one officer or one department who has that reach to all the departments, all the SPUs. So fortunately, internal audit happened to be a department which had that reach. So many organizations asked the internal audit teams to roll out the COVID compliance framework. So the internal auditors used to go and explain the framework, teach the framework, do training on the framework, which happened. Then the internal auditors, being who is very famous for monitoring the internal controls, has been asked to monitor compliance with the COVID framework as well. So most of us were engaged in the role of compliance manager as well, because there was so much of COVID compliance guidelines which has to be complied. Otherwise, the PHI or the government inspectors who come there can take action against us. So before them come, the internal auditors were supposed to make sure we are complying everything. So by getting a compliance checklist, by getting a compliance, what do you call, affirmation statement, we made sure people are complying with the COVID guidelines. And finally, we became the COVID auditors as well. Where we went and audited, checked whether things are happening properly, whether things are happening as per the guideline, as per the training provided. Our people are practicing, our people are wearing masks, our people are sanitizing their hands, and do we have enough sanitizing facilities? So those things started to get audited by internal audit departments. So if you look at this slide itself, it's a combination of the assurance activity and the consulting activity which internal audit teams started to play. If you guys are going to argue where is the independence, because you have contributed to develop the framework, you are going and auditing that particular framework, where is the independence? But you see, as Sion mentioned in his presentation, at the moment, what is important for the business we should do, what is without actually doing anything bad or fraud or anything like that, but what is important to ensure the success of the business is what we are supposed to do. So in that situation, we may have to get involved in some consulting activity, we may have to get involved in compliance activities, we had to do our internal audit activities as well, which the internal auditors do. So more weight went to the advisor role other than the auditor role in the past few months. But that doesn't mean our assurance provider role reduced, right? It also changed. As Sion also mentioned in his presentation, financial fraud prevention and detection became one of the prime area for the internal auditors. So, I mean, luckily, many internal audit teams had the analytical engines. So first time most of the internal audit department started to really use the analytical engine properly this time during this period, because they did not have access to the source documents, office were locked, traveling restrictions were there, so can't go and question people, right? And online questioning, like doing an interrogation or an interview over the Zoom call, it's quite difficult. But the analytical engine, the use of analytical engines, whatever we had, played a big role in the last few months. So the whole internal audit in terms of financial fraud prevention was centered around the analytical engines what we had. I saw some of the audit firms were in the last few months developing their own analytical engines using the Excels and other spreadsheets in order to monitor the financial fraud prevention, in order to ensure financial fraud prevention and detection. The other area we were focusing was on the going concern indicators. How is our cash flow forecast like? How is our cash generation looks like, right? Many internal auditors were asked to look into that and started reporting. In addition to the finance team, started reporting regarding these going concern indicators, as well as to the board, as well as in their internal audit programs, they included the going concern indicators as well to audit. Even the external audit firms asked the internal auditors to look into these areas, especially during this period. So if you guys have not yet incorporated going concern indicators into your audit program, see whether you can incorporate that into your audit program, which might help your organization a lot, especially during this situation. And of course, assurance over compliance, COVID compliance, health and safety compliance became more important in the last 9 months. And internal auditors, I saw many internal auditors getting a lot of knowledge about these health and safety practices, and they were pioneering the health and safety practices in their organization. That also happened. As well as the other important area where internal auditors started to focus was the IT controls. The general computer controls of the company, is it properly functioning or not functioning? The internal auditors were continuously doing the audits and giving assurance to the board, saying that yes, internal controls are working, or internal controls are not, IT controls are working or not working, where our vulnerabilities are. Those were picked up by the internal audit teams, and they were reported to the IT teams as well as the board, and then on time they were able to fix it to avoid a big cyber attack on the organization. So overall, the internal auditor, the assurance provider role also, like earlier what we used to perform these market audits and sales audits and all started to take a backseat, but these four audits started to take more priority. The whole internal audit function also started to get reorganized. The audits became completely analytic based, right? Because you don't have the numbers. I mean, as internal auditors, all of us have this intuition, professional judgment, right? When you see something happening, you something tells you it's wrong. You have to question that. You have to check that. So that when you practice as an internal auditor or auditor for maybe more than 10 years, it automatically comes to you. But unfortunately, in this situation, you can't use the intuition because you don't see anything. You are working from home and you are seeing only your laptop, and your intuition doesn't help you that much in this situation. But analytics really helped you a lot. As I explained earlier, the analytics became a much important role. Analytical engines started to play a big role in the internal audit function. My suggestion to you guys, like if your departments have not yet purchased an analytical engine, or you don't have an analytical engine right now, see whether you can incorporate something into your organization. You can buy one for your own purpose, or you can rent one. So see how can you get done that. Don't rely on the source document based audits, because it's not going to be practical in the coming next few months. Then the reliance on digital documents, yeah, that's a place where the level of assurance we provided started to reduce, because it's not like seeing a paper-based document where some signature, authorization, right? So we had to rely on the digital documents. To rely on the digital documents, the computer system, internal controls have to be perfect. But when the organization's computer controls are not perfect, the digital documents produced by the computer environment is also not so perfect. So that's an area where things were quite shaky. So as internal auditors, we have to work on improving the internal control, IT related internal controls, as well as our ability to check, verify, and question the digital documents. And the last one, and the most important one, which I want to tell you, is the whole internal audit started to change more towards a platform-based operation rather than people-based operation. This is inevitable. A lot of people predicted this will come in 2030s or 40s, but unfortunately, COVID-19 has brought this on us sooner. So it's like this. Now, it's like Netflix, or it's like Uber. Let's say Uber. So the whole Uber works on a Uber platform, right? So the drivers, the passengers, the whole stakeholders of Uber works on the Uber platform. Uber is a platform-based organization. If you are going to be like this, if you are going to work from home, and if you are going to be more digitalized and all, internal audit also may have to think about becoming a platform-based organization rather than a people-based organization. It's about having a very strong internal audit platform, something like a app, something like an application or whatever, where the auditors connect and the client or the auditees connect, and the audit reports are there. Audit timetables are being monitored through that. Audit communication happen through that. Some sort of a platform. Now, I know most of us, we had these kind of platforms a little bit, but it's like this. In 1900, when the steam, I mean, in 18th century, or 19th century, the steam engines were the one which were running in the factories. But in the 20th century, the electricity was introduced. Many factories, many organizations, what they did was, they took this electricity and they started using here and there in their factories, right? And they failed, miserably failed. But some organization understood steam is outdated, electricity is the new flow, and they redesigned the whole factory based on the electricity flow, and they prospered. Similarly, if you take today the whole organization, the organizations which are based, organizations which started using internet data for their activities did not prosper. But the organizations who redesign or born on an internal platform is prospering a lot. Now, if I take HBO is trying to incorporate IT or the data science and the what do you call the information technology into its platform. So it's struggling. But Netflix is something which is born on that platform, which is prospering. So far, as internal auditors, we had these platforms and an analytical engine and the internet and all. So we were using it for our purpose. But it may be a good time for us to redesign our whole operation based on a data flow, based on a platform. What is the new flow for the internal audit? How can humans get fixed into that platform rather than having list of humans and we are trying to fix different platforms here and there on the humans. So still the research and still the idea is new, still people are thinking, but I'm pretty sure, I hope by 2030, end of this decade, we will be having more internal audits or the auditors or many businesses, many platform-based businesses rather than the people-oriented businesses. So these are the, in terms of the internal audit organization, these are the changes which has been happening. So that's it from me, guys. Feel free to ask any questions. Akshay, over to you.
Thanks, Prasanna. Thank you for sharing yours and your colleagues' experience with us, especially coming from the last few months. So we can now commence the Q&A. So the first question, I would like to invite all the participants. If you do have any questions, kindly post it in the chat box, which is in the Zoom package. The first question that I have is for Zion. Zion, in your presentation, you mentioned that internal auditors need to acquire new skills. Could you elaborate on that? What sort of new skills are required by internal auditors, especially after the onset of this COVID pandemic? And I'm sure, Prasanna, you also might be able to add to it after Zion makes his comments on this.
Right. So, Ashan, like I'll talk from the experience of our organization. So one is, depending on, using some of the online tools for interacting with the clients. We are not necessarily always, have trained ourselves in those ways. Then the next, I think, is using some of the tools which can allow us to review the ERPs that our organizations work with. So the IT skills are becoming extremely important. And then working as a team, using there are lots of tools out there, like Microsoft has tools, there are a host of tools. Which allows the internal audit teams to work as a team to maintain its working papers, to share notes, so that is, those are some of the, I would say the skills. So largely IT, working in a remote, thinking differently, managing the meetings in a different way, and even interacting with the staff, through remote access, which we could do previously, just walk up to somebody and talk, replacing that with the remote touch and understanding what the issues are. And also, if we are working in an organization, understanding our organization much better, because when we were working on a physical basis, there was always of the option where we could actually, sit down with somebody and get an understanding of what things are. But in a remote situation, you need to be oriented about your organizations much better, even before you start your audit, because you are never going to get that that advantage of actually sitting in front of somebody, face to face, physically, and get some ideas. I remember in one of the sessions which we did with Prasanna and others recently, there was some question about how to do the physical stock taking remotely, and that was a pretty interesting discussion. I'm sure Prasanna will talk more about it. Over. Back to you.
Okay. Um, I completely agree with Sion's suggestion that we have to inbuilt into us, especially the analytical skills is very important. So in addition to the analytical skill, as Zion touched on, that the ability to use devices properly to conduct audit, that is quite important, right? So your phone is actually an audit device now. Um, so how are you going to use it? What apps you can use? What apps you have to have as an internal auditor? How to use Zoom better? How to use a Zoom whiteboard to collaborate properly with your audit team to and get a proper audit done. So these things you have to focus on too. One more skill which I would like people to see to get is the skill of designing good business processes, because the current business processes, whatever we see in our organizations, are actually outdated. These business processes are not going to survive, and most of the business processes are not going to survive in 2030s and 2040s. So, and unless we start preparing our organization for 2030 right now, it's our organizations may become obsolete. So therefore, as an internal auditor, we are the people who see the processes. We are the people who are authorized to challenge someone, question the processes. So we should first of all understand before every audit, look at the process and say if it is a digital native organization, how that process will work. How can we convert that process into a more digitalized environment? So for that, we need the skill of designing the business processes. So studying them, evaluating, researching, reporting, properly presenting new business processes, it may be required. So that is a set of area which people or the organization will prefer more for the internal auditors to have.
So,
Motivation.
so if I were to sum it up, it is improving your digital skills, analytical skills, your ability to review a process and
design a
benchmark,
process.
yes, and benchmark against best practices. And also, as you said, the communication skills are also important. Yeah, there is no point in having good technical skills if you are not able to communicate effectively what you need to communicate. So we have a few questions from our participants today. One of the questions is, how can we audit the organization culture without visiting the client place or branch network? So as you said, Prasadna, these days, most of the audits are being done remotely, right? They are virtual internal audits. So if you are to do a culture audit, right, obviously you need to interact with people. You need to culture audit is very, very difficult to be done remotely. So what do you like to share any thoughts on that? How can we audit the organization culture without visiting the client place or branch network? Perhaps through the use of tools, virtual tools like Zoom, Meet, and perhaps that way. So if you can share your thoughts on that.
Yeah. So fortunately, we did a one culture audit sometime back, so I can share from that experience. I mean, the feedback on about the culture of the organization from the internal auditor has been always given to the audit committee from the internal audit department. So that is, as you told Ashin, that is based on the interaction what we had, what we see, what's happening in the boardrooms, what we see, whatever happening in the factory floors. Based on that, we used to give a feedback. But when we did a culture audit, per se, that we basically did a culture audit through a questionnaire. So we basically using the Survey Monkey, like we put a list of questions for various employees to assess what is the culture, whether it is a preferred culture or not. So actually, internal audit department doesn't have to do it. Like HR teams may be doing an HR engagement surveys. So if you get hold of the results of HR engagement surveys, and if you study that properly and interpret, then you will be able to understand the culture as well. So it's a very difficult, I mean, the real culture you may not see during this period. Still we don't know. And actually the culture also changing, because the culture what we had when we used to go to office and the culture we have when we are working from home is completely different. So, say for example, when you work at home, work at office, you meet a boss and you smile at the boss and then you tell some good morning or whatever, and you can shape things. But when you are working online, you can't shape anything. You have to anyhow deliver the result. If you don't deliver the result, you'll be very evident. So culture is also changing, and so we have to see what is this new culture which is emerging because of whole work from home thing and all online working thing, and maybe conducting surveys and one-on-one interviews with the people maybe the best way at the moment to conduct a culture audit. So frankly, I have not done a culture audit in the last 9 months. No time for that at all. But maybe in the future we have to think about in that terms, Ashin.
Yeah, Sion, would you like to add anything to that? Or?
Yeah, I would just say, I think, Prasanna touched on the aspects. I think the most important point that he noted is that the cultures are also changing. That's very important. So, like understanding the old culture is probably not in existence in many organizations. And the other point I think which Prasanna also noted is using the surveys, etc. But what I would say is, what I have been seeing in the last 8-9 months in all the departments is that we are also getting used to the world of remote working. It's different and it's a different way of thinking. And I think as we evolve, and as we we'll probably find, that they are, that soft touch which we could do physically before would probably be found in the remote system as well. So yeah, it's a very changing world. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think since most employees are working from home, this is the time to enforce your culture. If your organization has good values or a high standard of integrity, since people are mostly working from a home setting, remote work setting, this is the time to reinforce your policies and procedures, the important values in your organizations. Because as Prasanna touched on, there is this risk of fraud. Fraud. There has been a spike in fraud during the COVID period. And one way of tackling fraud is to reinforce your culture. If it is a good culture, you need to reinforce it. You need to re-educate your staff on the importance of values, right? Because as you know, according to the fraud triangle, you have this opportunity, rationalization, and motivation. And as I think Zion mentioned, due to this disruption, you have staff are more incentivized to commit fraud because you have salary cuts in one side. Then in certain companies, organizations have laid off staff. And this means that the staff who are remaining have to carry out more work. So they might feel pressured into stealing, into committing various sorts of fraud. Organizations also will be motivated to fictitiously enhance their financials. So this is the time for internal audit to enforce, to bring to the fore the code of ethics, the code of business conduct in the organization. So carrying out a culture audit in this setting is not very easy, but as Prasanna stated, it's mainly carried out through a survey, and you could also use these online tools, Zoom, Team, to interact with the staff and get a feel of how seriously they consider the importance of internal controls. So moving on to the next question is from Tarindu. He asks how to ensure the effectiveness and efficiency of remote internal audit engagement. That is, internal auditors are now carrying out audits of various departments remotely, and as Prasanna stated, digitally. You're reviewing digital documents. So, how to ensure the effectiveness and efficiency of such an engagement? Prasanna, you may be able to add your thoughts to this.
Okay. So now, so if I look from a supervisor perspective,
Right.
right? So if I'm a supervisor of an audit engagement, earlier the audit supervisor may have a meeting with his team maybe once a week, right? Once a week he might go and he may have a chat. But with the new digital environment, once a week is too much. You may have to have a daily meeting if you want to ensure efficiency. It's about the daily a 15 minutes or a 30 minutes meeting is extremely important. So then only because the people may not feel engaged if you are meeting only once a week because everybody is working from home. So one way of increasing that efficiency and the effectiveness as well is to have a daily roundup calls, right? More just for a 10 minutes. What is happening, team? What you have? What are the areas you are focusing on? What you have found out? To whom you have to talk? That will increase efficiency and effectiveness of the audit a lot. The second one is basically the more empowering the team, the empowering the team to pick up areas to audit, because we have to understand, for me also it's a new environment, for them also it's a new environment. I am old. I am coming from, say, TV, what do you call this, cassette recorder, cassette player era.
Prasanna,
And
you're not told.
okay. So I'm compared to these youngsters now, like, so
The
these
millennials,
guys,
millennials, yeah.
yeah, these millennials, these guys are born with phones and before even they reach age 2 or 3, they have their Facebook and Instagram profiles up and running. So the way these guys think and the way people like us think is completely different, right? Or not completely, but there are differences. So when things are digitalized, I mean, as a supervisor, I also have to understand my team may have better insights rather than me regarding these technologies or whatever, and I should I should empower them to use it. I should when these guys started using a tool or whatever, since I don't know the tool, I should not go and say no, don't do it. I mean, I really don't know what you are doing about. So as a auditor, I had to allow them to bring their knowledge, their device savviness into the audits. Then these guys also will be more engaged in the audit, and they will also do new things, and which will at the end will produce a good audit report. These are two basic things which I normally do.
Yeah. So what you're saying is, I mean, coming from an audit firm, what I can say is carrying out audits remotely is not easy. If especially for the supervisors, it takes a lot of time. More time has to be spent on supervising and monitoring the work of subordinates. And as you said, I think what is important is to stay in touch. These daily catch-up meetings, sharing of success stories, constantly remaining in communication with your staff, I think is important to keep them motivated also. Otherwise, they sometimes tend to drift. And Sion, anything you like to add to that? Or?
So I think I'm fine. The presenter has touched on. Yeah.
Right. So another question that has come about is this: how can we audit verify the documents without visiting the client place? So this is very important. Most of the evidence now is given digitally to the auditor. So it is placed in a folder and we access it digitally. But the question is, should we rely on it 100%, or is there a requirement to validate those documents in any way?
Shall I answer that?
Yes, sure, Prasanna, go ahead.
Yeah. So as I told in the presentation also, like, it's about the IT environment of the organization. So as auditor, first of all, assess the IT control environment. And is that IT control environment is strong or weak? So if the IT control environment is very strong, then the documents will be reliable. If the IT control environment is not strong, then you are looking at the documents which can be subject to manipulation. So in that situation, you have to be very careful about the level of assurance what you are giving on that particular site. So all depends on the IT, the strength of the IT environment.
So I think if I were to add that, I think what is important here is that you need to exercise greater professional skepticism. That is, when you look at these digital documents, if you see anything amiss, something, and normally you shouldn't just be silent. You have to raise the red flag and probe it more. So that is important. What we do in audit is about 80% of the audit we do it digitally, but then we spend 1 or 2 days at the field trying to validate important key documents, because sometimes it's very difficult to check the authenticity of a document when it's in soft copy format. So we complete 80 to 90% of the work, especially in our external audit environment, and then we spend 1 or 2 days validating the most important critical documents that we feel need to be checked on site. There is another question. This is, of course, regarding IT security, internal audit, how to ensure the data security in work from home environment. Any one of you would like to take this question, or?
I think Ashin, you are better to answer that question. No?
Yeah. So here, of course, I think what is important is you need to have a work from home policy, right? All these employees who are connecting to your head office infrastructure digitally, you need to have VPNs in place, password controls, bring your own device policies. Even in the case of VPNs, they must be licensed VPNs, not these freely available VPNs. So there's a whole lot of IT controls, multi-factor authentication, encryption. So all this begins by putting in place an IT security policy, especially targeting people who are working from home, because companies face numerous challenges, especially when it comes to updating of patches, updating of viruses, virus updates, especially when employees work from home. So what you can do is you can read up on this on the internet. So where you start off is by first formulating a work from home policy, and then looking at the various cyber risks that the company faces from these employees who are working from home. Because what you find today is that the laptop, your office laptop today is used by your family members, your children. All are having access to your office workstation or your office laptop. So you need to have firstly encryption in place, multi-factor authentication, bring your own device policy, proper VPNs for remotely connecting to your network, and also enforcing all your other cybersecurity policies. Because usually what happens is when they are in office and they connect to the network from office, all these patches and virus signatures get updated. But when it's from home, it's a challenge. So whole loads of safety precautions that you need to take, right? Yeah, removing all USB accesses, as Kapil has. But then again, you need to sometimes connect your USBs to your laptop. So as long as you have encryption enabled, even if someone steals your USB, yet again, no one can access the data in it, right? I hope that answers that question to a certain extent. Those are some of the precautionary safeguards you need to take into account. Prasanna, you also touched on this importance of analytics tools. I think you were referring mainly to Forestpin, which your group uses. Any specific examples that you can give us? You said, of course, that new internal auditors, they need to develop their analytical skills, and even Excel is an analytical tool if you know how to use it properly. But yet again, you all use this software called Forestpin. How specifically, how has that tool enabled your group to, detect anomalies?
Okay, so I should not comment about a particular brand, but generally, what I would say is the analytical tool. What it does is like it throws out every day. It throws out the suspicious transactions. So if you take the whole group, the group may have around maybe 10 to 20,000 transactions happening per day. So out of that, it has a risk rating based on certain criterias, and it throws out the top five. We can program it like whether we want top five, top 10, top 30, or whatever. So it gives us the five suspicious transactions for the whole group. So immediately what we can do is we can alert that to the relevant finance teams saying that there's a transaction like this happen. Are you okay with that or not? As well as if we feel suspicious, we can call for the source documents on SAP and have a look at it and ask questions whether it's fine or not fine. Frankly, I mean any tool can easily provide that top five suspicion if you program the tools properly. But by working with the teams, what I have seen is what lacks in our team is when we get that alert, we tend to close it as a normal alert, like it's normal. We don't do the investigation. We don't feel like. But when you sit and look at it and start questioning why this happened, why who approved it, why he approved, why we purchased this, did we really purchase, where is the good right now? When you really ask those questions around the alert, only the real benefit of that tool comes out. So otherwise, it's like you are having a tool and just getting alerts. So I will stress upon like you guys earlier mentioned, like professional skepticism. When you get a alert from a system, how much professional skepticism you are using will decide success of that particular tool. But it's not the machine, the man behind the machine who decide the success of the tool.
So what you are saying is a fool with a tool is still a fool, isn't it?
Exactly.
Right. So I don't think we have any more questions. So I'll just ask you this final question. This is, of course, due to the COVID pandemic. There are emerging risks faced by internal auditors, which they have to cover in their internal audit plans. What are these emerging risks, Prasanna? I think one of the risks were, as one of the participants stated, it's on cyber security risks, because we are now on digital platforms, etc., and all that. Apart from cyber risks, are there any? I think you touched on fraud risk, isn't it? Any specific areas in fraud that you would like to mention?
Not exactly, like mainly the possibility of a business becoming irrelevant because of all these new type of businesses which are coming up. That's what I see as a risk.
But I think you also touched on the health and safety risk. This is one area which we have to cover now. And also apart from that, I think you mentioned frauds related to financials. I think is it related to payments, accounts payable, or
mainly accounts payables, accounts payables and the cash collection.
Cash collections, right?
Yeah.
Okay, fine. So Kapil, I think with that we can conclude the Q&A. I don't think we have any more questions. Let me just check, do a final check. Yes, I think we have covered all the questions. So over to you, Kapila.
Sure. Sure. Thank you, Ashen. One moment.
Right.
Okay. Thank you very much for everybody. Now we have brought this session almost to the end. Now, before I wind up, again, this session has been brought to you by the Institute of Internal Auditors as well as the Academy of Finance. And I told you at the outset, Academy of Finance is conducting the Certified Internal Auditor Program of the IIA. So we just started and we had our induction session last week. And there are some of you who have already joined that program. If there is anyone else who is interested, We will share all the program details. You could later get in touch with us so that in case you are interested, either you personally or any of your department members, we'll be happy to share that information with you. So just before winding up, once again, first of all, I must thank Ashane for coming forward, like always, to facilitate this session, to moderate this session, and add your valuable insight. And apart from that, I would also like to thank Prasanna as well as Sion among the busy schedules coming forward to conduct this valuable and useful session to educate the community about the very relevant, timely topic on the role of internal auditors and how the practical problems that are faced and how an internal auditor should gear themselves to meet this situation successfully. So I'm not going to take any more time. Once again, thank all of you, the presenters, as well as I would like to thank all the participants for taking your time, and I'm sure that you've got something useful which will be helpful to conduct your duties and take your career forward during an unprecedented time like this. So let's call it a day. Thank you very much. Good night to all of you. Thank you.
Good night, Kapila. Good night. Thank you. Bye.